So this is the first of two votes here this evening on the floor of the House, this one condemning the violence against peaceful protesters outside the Turkish ambassador's residence here in Washington last month. We had a chance to speak on the phone a bit earlier with the senior story producer from the New York Times.
Malachy Browne, what happened at the Turkish embassy in Washington on May 16th during Prime Minister Erdogan's visit?
Two groups gathered at the Turkish ambassador's residence. One group was there to support Mr. Erdogan and to meet with him. The second group were American citizens who have Armenian and Kurdish backgrounds, and they were there criticizing Mr. Erdogan's policies in the Middle East and towards Armenian and Kurds living in Turkey.
The situation seemed to explode on Twitter that afternoon in the coverage of it. What was it that sparked the conflict between the security forces and protesters?
There were two brawls. There was an initial skirmish when the two groups of protesters met in the street, and some violence broke out at that point. The police, Washington police, quickly intervened and separated the groups and held them apart for several minutes. Mr. Erdogan hadn't arrived at the residence at this point. He arrived some minutes later. His security detail spoke with him. They seemed to communicate amongst one another, and at that point, a second brawl broke out when two armed men, rushed across the street and began to attack protesters.
You and your colleagues at the New York Times at nytimes.com developed, wrote, and produced an extensive piece looking at this conflict between the two sides. Did the Turkish president's security detail attack protesters in Washington? What did the video show?
Yes, the videos. Through the videos, we were able to identify 24 men who attacked protesters in that second brawl. A number of them, at least 10 of them, were members of the. Sorry, I'll repeat that. At least 10 of them resembled. At least 10 of them resembled the security detail of President Erdogan. One of the instigators of that violence, we tracked him through multiple camera angles through the crowd, and on him we saw an identification card that showed that Turkey's presidential seal and the flags of the U.S. and Turkey. He also wore a gun, he wore an earpiece, he wore a Turkish breastpin, bearing all the hallmarks of the security detail for Mr. Erdogan. Several of the other men were armed. We identified at least 7 armed men who were involved in that. There seemed to be two groups of security detail. One was a group of men wearing dark suits. The second was a group of men wearing the summer uniform worn by Turkish security guards. We've seen pictures of them wearing this uniform in the past. For instance, at the wedding of a member of Erdogan's family, and earlier that day when Mr. Erdogan was visiting President Trump at the White House.
You talked about the security ID. In fact, part of the video that you're showing is from VOA Turkish. Their video kind of broke this story on that day. VOA Turkey, and the video here, the presidential seal, Turkey's presidential seal. How did they get such great access and video so close up?
Their cameraman was shooting on a mobile device that was stabilized using a gimbal, and so he had a very steady view. He was there amongst the crowd, panning his camera slowly as events unfolded. In between the two brawls, as I said, several minutes elapsed between the first skirmish and the second attack. And as he moved through the crowd, he got really up close details of some of the people who were involved in the second attack. And although there was chaos in the second attack, through multiple camera angles from other smartphones and eyewitnesses who were there, we were able to trace the movements of these people back. And because we had such close-up detail of them prior to the attack and prior to the chaos, we were able to identify who several of them were.
Let me ask you about the video you have of Prime Minister Erdogan in his limousine. What do you know of what he was saying to his staff, his security people there? What do we know of him saying that? And was this before or after his meeting with President Trump?
This was after his meeting with President Trump, and he arrived at the Turkish ambassador's residence. We don't know what was said. What I can tell you is that he spoke to his head of security, Muhsin Kose, who was standing at the rear door of the car, speaking to Mr. Erdogan as he sat in the car. At this stage, the police, at this stage, a brawl had not broken out. What we see then is that Mr. Kose, the head of security, speaks into his microphone. Three of the guards who are standing by Mr. Erdogan's car leave, and seconds later, an attack on the protesters happens. And we know that two of the men who ran across the street and began that fight are dressed as the security detail, are dressed like a security detail. They're armed and they're wearing earpieces. We also see one of the men who was guarding Mr. Erdogan's car entering the brawl from the right of the frame and punching and kicking protesters before he returns, joins the security detail at the car and escorts Mr. Erdogan into the ambassador's residence.
Well, it didn't take long for this incident to get the attention of Congress, with both the House and Senate developing resolutions against Turkey, with some repercussions anticipated in this. But there haven't been any so far. Nobody's been arrested, no member of his Prime Minister Erdogan's staff, correct?
That's correct. As we understand that investigations are ongoing.
And the piece is titled, "Did the Turkish President's Security Detail Attack Protesters in Washington?" What the video shows. We've been talking with Malachy Browne, who is a senior story producer at the New York Times, and you can follow his reporting at nytimes.com and on Twitter at Malachy Browne. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.